Hello, and welcome to a Sunny Book Nook. Today I'm going to be talking through all of my honorary mention favorites of 2020 because, as I mentioned in my last video, I read so many phenomenal books this past year that I felt very limited in picking a top 20 list. So I have like a bunch more honorary mention books that I really want to talk to you about and share because even though they were more 4-3-star books, they're still really memorable to me and made a big impact in both my personal life and like my reading life, and I think have impacted me as a reader enough for me to want to like talk about them and give a little memoriam to them. And because a lot of my books are still shipping in from the East Coast, I think I'm gonna make this a 2-part video. So this is part 1 and I have a pretty hefty stack of books to talk about here, so let's just jump right in. The first book I have in the stack is Homegoing by Yajiasi. This book was a bestseller, was really popular in 2017, I think, when it came out, but I only read it this year, and I understand why it was/is so popular. It is a generational story following the family lineage of people who are descendants of one mother from Ghana in like the 18th century or something. We're following all of her descendants, how they kind of branch out when one of her descendants is sold into slavery and another is like a princess. So we kind of follow their narrative storylines throughout time up until modern day, and I thought that it was really, really profound in its exploration of history and family history and lineage, identity, race, slavery, all of these things in a really narratively compelling, tight packaged kind of setup. Every single chapter is a different character, different time period, and we're seeing how the past impacts them and how they impact the future. And I think that it's just a really powerful story, and I understand why it was so hyped, and I am proudly part of that hype, and I'm glad I read this book this year. Another book that I don't have with me, but that I also think was phenomenal that I read this year, and actually is a 2020 release, is Yajiasi's sophomore book, Transcendent Kingdom. This book explores this immigrant daughter whose younger brother suffered from addiction when they were growing up, and now she is a neuroscientist researcher, and she's exploring the intersection of religion and science because she was raised up very Christian in very white Alabama, and she deals with a lot of trauma and depression and working out her own feelings and understandings of the world. And I just think this writing was very profound and beautiful and really eloquently done. The way that the main character's thoughts and emotions are expressed as she experiences life in kind of recollections and the different aspects of growing up and also being an adult, I think was just so compelling to read about and very relatable. The discussions had here about finding yourself and also dealing with family trauma and dealing with a father who leaves to go back to his country and just never comes back and starts a new life, or dealing with the death of a sibling who was a major sports star who, upon his passing, your entire community views him as this great potential for athletic skill that has somehow gone out, and not him as a person. And also the exploration of both science and religion and how they're oftentimes framed as antithetical to each other, how the main character kind of views it as both pieces that are integral to her life, identity, and growing up. So yeah, I just thought this book was so beautiful, and Yajiasi is a phenomenal writer, and I will read anything that she puts out. The next book I have in this stack is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, and I've talked about this book a lot on this channel, so I'm sure you know what this is about, but if you don't, it's basically like a suburban drama set in the 90s in this really, really perfect little white suburb in Ohio, and things get a little shaken up when mom and her daughter move in, and there is a whole court case that happens because this Chinese mother left her baby on the front steps of the fire department, and now there's a custody battle over who gets the baby, the white couple who wants to adopt the baby or the mother of the child. And I thought that all of the different characters in this book were really, really, I keep on saying the word compelling, but it's because it's true. They are so compelling and so interesting. I think Celeste Ng does a really beautiful job of fleshing out these realistic characters and relationships and how these relationships impact these characters and vice versa. And I think that it's so beautifully crafted and it's so impeccable too. It is so cleanly constructed where all of the different conflicts kind of build up to a scenario, or these different little conflicts brew into a larger outstanding piece, and there are different threads of character relationships and stuff that kind of you see throughout the book, and as all these threads get entangled together, it creates this masterpiece of just glorious insanity. I just really, really enjoyed this book, and I think about it a lot. I think about this suburban setting being this repressed kind of constructed idea of what America and opportunity looks like, all the different subtle and not subtle forms of racism that are manifested, the ways that children and social circles and stuff are included and not included. It also deals with like teenage pregnancy and like abortion and stuff, and I don't know, I just feel like this book really deftly and skillfully deals with a lot of issues in a really nuanced way. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and definitely one of the best reads of 2020. It just didn't quite make my top 20 list. All right, the next book I have here is another Ottessa Moshfegh book. As you may notice, I love Ottessa Moshfegh's writing because I mentioned her other book, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, in my other video, but this video I'm talking about Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. This book is very weird and dark in kind of similar satirical almost ways that My Year of Rest and Relaxation is. We're in the perspective of this old woman kind of looking back on her life in the 60s in a town she calls Xville, and she recounts her experience working at a juvenile boys detention facility and being this like 20-year-old gawky, scrawny, mousy little woman who lives with her alcoholic father, said alcoholic father being an ex-cop, and all of the little like oddities that come with this life. Our main character, Eileen, in this book is a very gross and unsettling character. She makes a lot of judgments about people that are just very questionable, and a lot of her behaviors and her living situation is just very gross, but I think that she is really like a manifestation of kind of the realities of being a person. I think all the little gross things that people think and do and want to do, and I feel like this book is also really about isolation and stuff that comes out of that, because there's this whole build-up where this new teacher lady is introduced as a new staff member of the juvenile detention facility, and things start to get shaken up. And the way that this plot played out was so wild. Like, I did not see any of that coming. There's like a hostage situation. Eileen, as a main character, has a lot of weird fantasies about other people because she doesn't really have any like genuine connections with other people. A lot of her understanding and perception of other people around her is entirely like her own projection and the assumptions she's making, and I think that is so funny and so true for so many people. And I don't know, I really enjoyed this book. It really worked for me. The next book I'm going to talk about here kind of reminds me of Tessa Moshfegh's writing style, and that is Pizza Girl by Jean Kyung Fraser. I talked about this book in my last vlog, and in which I read this book, but I didn't really vlog the process of reading it because when I started vlogging, I had already been mostly done with it, so sorry about that. But this is the book, and it is about this 18-year-old pregnant pizza girl in LA who develops this weird attachment to this MILF when she calls in and orders something weird for her pizza, and they develop a strange kind of relationship. This book was so fascinating, kind of gritty and dark in the way that a lot of Moshfegh's books are, in which it's like a troubled main female character who has a weird family situation, because in this book her father has died due to alcoholism and she is still suffering with alcoholism, and she and her boyfriend from high school, whose parents died in a tragic car accident and whom they like met and became friends through this whole situation. So it's like a very wild ride of this girl's kind of spiraling, and the way that her family and the people who love her and care about her like really just have no grasp on her, because she doesn't even have a grasp on herself. She doesn't even know what she's doing, obviously, because she's this 18-year-old girl who doesn't really know what direction she's going in life and doesn't really care to know, because she's just in that very kind of lonely state of mind. But I feel like this book really does explore isolation and addiction and just fucked up family dynamics and trauma in a really nuanced and fascinating way that is still really compelling, where we have a lot of empathy for the main character. The main character of this book, his mom is an immigrant from Korea, and I think like that is also explored a little bit, that kind of mother-daughter immigrant experience and bonding and that very specific form of relationship. Yeah, I just think this book is really good and I need to reread it soon. I really enjoyed it. Next book on this list is yet another book that I've talked about a lot, and that is also about a lonely woman who discovers herself. Clearly, I love books about lonely women. And that is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. I've talked about this book so much. This book is about a woman who's living in Scotland, and she also has a pretty traumatic past that she's still grappling with, and in that she's been working at this like office for like 9 years. She doesn't really have any particular career aspirations or anything in life, and she doesn't have that many friends or connections or relationships in the world until one day, out of the blue, one of her coworkers and her help this man who like has a heart attack in the middle of the road, and they develop these relationships, and she develops this fascination with this like guy who's a singer or whatever. I think this book talks about complicated, traumatic mother-daughter relationships and kind of coming into yourself and your identity in this really, really heartwarming way. We see this main character go from a really kind of anxious and isolated person to someone who knows herself and can make connections with other people, when before she was just very awkward and neurotic. Yeah, I just think this book is so beautiful and such a wonderful story about a lonely woman who discovers community and love for herself. It's so beautiful. The next book I have here is a young adult fantasy. Whoa. And that is Marie Rutkowski's The Midnight Lie. When I was a kid, I loved Marie Rutkowski's series, The Cabinet of Wonders, I believe. But this book, I think, is pretty good too as like an adult person reading this now. In this fantasy world, there are like high kith and there are low kith. And this is basically like a class/caste system within this society in which the low kith live outside the borderlands of the wall, and the people on the inside kind of just party and are rich people. It is strictly enforced by the police state, which basically if you are caught doing anything out of line and you're a low kith, they'll put you in jail and they'll make you do a payment. Sometimes it'll be your hair, sometimes it'll be your blood, sometimes it'll be a body part, depending on how severe the crime. And one day, our main character, who's a soft-spoken girl, this orphan girl who's raised by this lady who makes fake passports for people to be able to cross the wall. She sees one of the rich people, the high-kith birds flying around, and she catches it to return it and, you know, maybe get a prize or something. But then she gets arrested because they're like, oh, you stole this goddamn bird. And she's like, no, it came to me. Things happen. She meets this person in jail, and there's a little sapphic romance going on here. There's also some intrigue with the person that she works for, the woman who basically like raised her, like is kind of a mother figure for her, and her sister figure who's also someone who like works for her. And yeah, I just think that this book delves into this fantastical, magical world of magic and intrigue and gives us these reveals in a really skillful manner. And the ending of this book is also just so mind-blowing. Like, I think this is a really, really well done YA fantasy novel, and I think it deserves so much more hype because it's a really good sapphic romance fantasy book. Like, people are always looking for more lesbian romance situations, and I think this is really it for you. Like, you need to get into this. It kind of reminds me of like a young adult version of like Mistborn because of the whole like class system within society and the magical powers that come within it and like that are revealed, and this, you know, main orphan girl character. Yeah, I just think there are some similarities there that make me understand why I love this book a lot too. This is a great one, and me talking about this makes me want to reread it. The next book I have here is another book that I've talked about on this channel a little bit, and that is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. This book has been hyped up all year, and I think for a pretty good reason. I think it's a pretty solid book, and the twists and turns and the drama of it all is like very messy and very fun. At least from what I was reading, I kept on being like, oh my god, and like cringing so hard out of all the things that were happening. Because this is kind of like a modern satire on different types of white people manipulating, exploiting, and generally being racist towards Black people, particularly the main character of this book, who works as a nanny for this rich white lady in New York City. And I think that this book explores that identity of being like a millennial and seeing all your friends doing cool things, and then you being like, I just nanny, like I don't make a salary or anything, what the hell. And also that like influencer white lady type archetype. I feel like it kind of talks about all these different identities and storylines and how they all converge and diverge in these fascinating, incredibly wild ways. So yeah, I really enjoyed this read, and it stays on my mind a lot because like, even though I rated it 3 stars because I didn't think it was that enjoyable while I was reading it because I was just cringing so hard, I think that it did a pretty good job at what it set out to do, which was satirize a lot of modern racial issues. I also think that the story is just particularly memorable. Like, one time I just explained the entire plot of this book to my friends who don't really read fiction, and they were like, that is crazy. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. It's wild and it's so fun. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. Honorable mention list. Next book that I have here is a classic, but like a modern, I don't know whether this counts as a classic, I guess. And that is Nella Larsen's Passing. This book is about a Black woman during the Harlem Renaissance who is white passing, and she realizes that someone from her community who like left a while ago is now married to this racist white man, and she and this woman develop an interesting relationship after like a quick run-in. And I thought this book was a very interesting cultural and historical exploration of the Harlem Renaissance in New York City, as well as the idea of passing and like male-female relationships and women's relationships to each other in regards to race and colorism. I think that it was done really well, and it's a really slim book, but I think it like Nella Larsen, she really did something with this book. I think that if you like the book The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, you should read this book, because this really seems to be like the blueprint for that novel in both concepts and themes. The next book I have here is Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This book is about a Black grad student at a Midwestern university where everyone else is like white. It's about his experiences being gay there as well, and all the different microaggressions and just like straight up racist shit that happens to him, and all the little different subtle interactions that are hostile but also have to do with like that in-out group dynamic of grad school. And I just think it was really fascinating, and the story unfolded in this really delightful but kind of sad manner. Everything is tinged with a degree of just sadness and melancholy, and that's why it makes me feel of autumn. Like, it has that autumn melancholy, that kind of not dark academia, but like academia vibes, sort of. Yeah, I enjoyed seeing all the little dramas play out within the friend group and how uncomfortable that was, because that is like such a reality for so many people. And I feel like the little moments where this main character talks about the different ways that he experiences racism from other people, but has no way of really addressing it, it feels like, as the only Black person in the room. Yeah, I just think it was done so well, and Brandon Taylor is a phenomenal author. The next book I have here is a book that I've made a full video review about, so I'm gonna link that in the cards, and that is Nama by Sarah Blake. This book is a sapphic historical retelling of the story of Noah and the Ark, but from Noah's wife's perspective. In the Bible or the Torah, Noah's wife is not named, but this author reimagines the story from her perspective and gives her the name Nama. We see as Nama has to accompany her husband in this trip on a boat assigned from God, and like bringing the animals on and the process of living on this boat. And yeah, I just felt that this book blended magical realism, mythology, historical fiction, and just like this palpable realness to it, all in this very mystical, dreamlike manner. And I really enjoyed my reading experience of this book. Check out my full-length video review for more details on this, but I'm really glad I read this year. The next book that I have here is another really popular book from this year, and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I read this as like a group book club read, and I thought it was so interesting. The horror element was fascinating to me. The elk head woman was pretty scary, and the ways that she infiltrated all these people's lives and just fucked them over in different ways. And the commentary on tradition and modernity and indigeneity and settler colonialism throughout this novel is just very, very interesting. And I tabbed it up a bit. So yeah, I thought this book was really, really good, and it's a solid horror novel that I really enjoyed. I thought the ambiance, I thought the plot, I thought the characters were all compelling and memorable and just interesting. I'm glad it got hyped up this year because it definitely deserved it. So, all right, so the final book that I'm going to be talking about today that is on my honorable mentions list of favorite books of the year is another book that I've talked about a little bit on this channel already, The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This book is a dystopia, but it's a vague dystopia. It's not like the YA fantasy adventure novel that you would expect from a dystopian book. It's more of this quiet, melancholy, dry, sparse landscape that isn't really fleshed out, but things just happen, and it's kind of dreamy, but it's also very stark at the same time. It's set on this island where there are memories that get disappeared, and it's enforced by the memory police. So if one day they disappear rose petals, then all rose petals will be disappeared in physical form and also in people's collective memory. But there are people who do remember these things after they've been disappeared, and they are targeted by and disappeared by the memory police. The thing is that I don't recommend this book for people who want to go into it to figure out what the hell is going on and to kind of figure out the constructions of this society, because you're not going to find that. The island's name, the characters' names are never really mentioned. The way that this even works and the mechanics of it are never really explained or explored. But that's not really the purpose of the story, I don't think. I think it's more of an exploration of loneliness and finding connection despite that loneliness, and how people protect each other and form community in the face of governmental repression. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed this book and I'm so glad I read it early this year. Those are all of the honorable mention favorites of the year. Well, not all of them. This is part 1 of all of the honorable mention favorite books of this year. As you can tell, I read so many good books this year, and I'm so grateful for that, because even though this year went to shit, I got a lot of reading time in, at least. So yeah, let me know if you've read any of these books or if any of them sound interesting to you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stupid bullshit, and I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye!